The blade was already coming down when I stepped into its path. I had no weapon. I had a fistful of dried valerian and the wrong shoes and a heart going like a struck bell, and none of that stopped steel. But the man behind me had gone to one knee on his own throne room floor, and there was not a single soul in that hall of 100 wolves moving to cover him, and I found that I could not stand there and let it land. So I did the stupidest brave thing of my whole quiet life. I put my body between the king of the Iron Territories and the sword meant to open his throat, and I lifted my chin, and I looked the man with the blade dead in the eye. The whole court inhaled at once. Somewhere behind me a woman I had once feared said my name like a curse, and the king, the most powerful wolf alive, the man who had spent 3 weeks pretending I did not exist, said one word in a voice I had never heard him use. It started 3 weeks before any of that, with a wolf I mistook for a stray, and a king I mistook for cruel. I am Wren. I grind herbs. That is the whole of what the fortress at Caldmere knew about me, and it was the whole of what I wanted them to know. I was 22 that winter, a woman grown by any law that mattered, apprenticed to the old healer Bram in a stillroom that smelled of pine resin and crushed seed and the particular green bitterness of feverfew. I liked the smell. I liked the work. Most of all, I liked being beneath notice, because in a pack ruled by the strongest wolf to hold the northern throne in a century, being noticed was rarely a kindness. I had seen the king exactly 4 times, always from a distance, always the way you see weather. Soren, they said his name in the kitchens the way you'd name a hard frost, with respect and a little dread, and the unspoken hope it would pass over you. He was tall and dark and unsmiling, and the hall went quiet by reflex when he crossed it, and he had never once, in the 2 years I had ground his physician's tinctures, looked at me. I want to be honest with you, because this is my story and I would rather tell it straight. I did not dream about him. Stillroom girls who dream about kings end up sad or dead, and I had a strong preference for neither. Which is why, on the morning everything started, my first feeling was not wonder. It was irritation. There was a wolf asleep across my door. Not a dog. A wolf, black as a wet stone, big as a pony, breathing slow with its enormous head pillowed on my threshold like it had paid for the privilege. My door, in the servants' wing, at the cold end of a corridor nobody important ever walked. I stood there in the grey light with my basket on my hip, and I looked at this animal that could have taken my arm off at the shoulder, and it opened one amber eye, and it looked back at me with an expression of such frank, settled contentment that I nearly laughed. "You're in my way," I told it. It thumped its tail once against the stone and did not move. I should have run for the warriors. Any sensible person would have. Instead, I stepped over it, because I had willow bark to steep and an old man's joints to ease before the morning bell. And a girl who has decided not to be afraid of things is a hard girl to talk out of it. The wolf followed me inside. That is how the king found us an hour later, me at the work table with my sleeves pushed up, and his wolf lying across the stillroom hearth with its chin on its paws, watching me strain a tincture like I was the most interesting thing in the 7 territories. I knew it was him before I turned. The room changed temperature. The light from the door cut off because something large was standing in it. I turned, and there he was, filling my doorway in black wool and old leather, and his face, I will remember this until I die, his face was doing something complicated. Fury and mortification and a kind of helpless disbelief, all of it fighting for the front, none of it winning. "That animal," he said, very carefully, "is mine." I had gathered. I set down the strainer. He has excellent manners. He waited until I'd finished the willow bark to start shedding on my hearth. The wolf, hearing itself discussed, rolled onto its back and exposed its belly to the fire with the dignity of a creature that has never once been told no. Something moved across the king's jaw. For one instant, I would have sworn the corner of his mouth twitched. Then it was gone, locked down hard, and he crossed the room and took the wolf by the scruff and hauled it up, and the look he gave it was the look of a man whose own hand has betrayed him at cards in front of the whole table. "This will not happen again," he said. To the wolf. Not to me. "Of course," I said. It happened again the next morning. And the morning after that. By the fourth day, the wolf had stopped pretending it was an accident. It would be waiting when I opened my door at dawn, settled across the threshold with its tail already going, and it would walk me to the stillroom, and it would lie by the hearth all day. And in the evening, when the king came to retrieve it, and he always came himself, never sent Gunnar, never sent a warrior, came himself with that thundercloud on his face, it would go reluctantly, looking back at me over its shoulder the entire length of the corridor. I told myself it was nothing. A young wolf, bored, fond of the warm hearth and the smell of herbs. I was wrong, and some part of me already knew I was wrong, because of the things it started to bring. The first was a single boot. His boot, black, worn, expensive, and unmistakably one of a pair, deposited proudly on my doorstep at dawn like an offering to a small and confusing god. The second was a hunting knife with a horn handle, which I did not touch, and which a white-faced page came to collect with the news that the king had been looking for it since the previous evening. The third thing the wolf brought me, it carried gently the whole way, and laid at my feet without a mark on it, and I picked it up and turned it over, and felt the floor of my careful little life tilt very slightly under me. It was a book, a small one, bound in cracked green leather, its spine soft from handling. A book of remedies, old ones, northern ones, the kind even Bram only half remembered. On the first page, in a hard slanting hand, someone had written notes in the margins. Corrections, improvements, a whole life of careful reading. It was the king's. The wolf had taken it from the king's own rooms and brought it to the one person in the fortress who would understand exactly what it was worth. I want to tell you I gave it back at once. I did give it back. But I read it first, by candlelight, the whole night. And when I returned it the next evening, I had copied 3 remedies onto a scrap of vellum and tucked them up my sleeve. And I have them still. The court had begun to notice by then. You cannot have the King of the Iron Territories arriving in the servants' wing every evening at dusk for a week without the whole fortress constructing a story about it, and the story they built was not kind to me. I felt it in the kitchens, the small silences, the way conversation rerouted around me. A stillroom girl the king's wolf had chosen was a structural impossibility. A crack in the order of things, and packs do not love cracks. And then the woman who had come to Caldmere to be queen decided I was a problem worth solving. Lady Sigrid of Frostmere had arrived a fortnight before the wolf ever found my door, with a retinue and a wardrobe and the unshakable confidence of a woman who has been told from birth that a crown is owed her. Frostmere was the pack to the north, old and proud and lately hungry, and everyone understood the shape of the visit, even if no one said it aloud. The king would take a Luna. And the smart Luna, the politic Luna, the Luna that knotted 2 strong packs into one and kept the peace, was Sigrid. She found me in the corridor outside the stillroom on the 8th day. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, all clean lines and cold light, and she looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on good cloth. "You're the healer's girl," she said. "The one his beast has taken a fancy to." "I'm Wren." I didn't ask. She tilted her head. Do you know what happens to clever little nobodies who let a king's wolf make fools of them in front of a court? They don't rise, girl. They're made an example of. They're sent somewhere cold. She smiled. I'd hate for something to happen to you. Truly, you should send the animal away. I've tried, I said. He doesn't take instruction. I suspect he gets that from somewhere. The smile fell off her face like ice off a roof, and she swept away, and I stood there with my heart hammering and thought, with the small cold clarity that has gotten me through most of my life, that woman is going to hurt me. And she is going to do it soon. If you've stayed with me this far, stay a little longer, because what I found in the King's Ledger 3 nights later changed what I thought this story was, and changed me with it. I'd thought I knew why a king pushes a stillroom girl away in front of his whole court. I was about to learn I had the reason exactly backwards. Follow Moon and Iron so you don't lose the thread of how a wolf, a list, and one crossed-out name undid the most feared man in the north. Now, let me tell you about the night he came to the door himself. It was late when he came. Past the bell, the corridor dark, and I opened my door to drag the wolf back to him for once instead of the reverse. And there was no need, because the king was already there. He was standing 1 pace back from my threshold, not crossing it. A man who could have walked through any door in his kingdom, and he stood outside this one like the stone of it might burn him. And his wolf lay between us with its head on its paws, perfectly content, having engineered exactly this. I'll take him, Soren said. He didn't move to, neither did the wolf. You could come in, I said. It's cold. No, too fast. Then, quieter, like it cost him, no. I should have left it there. I am not, it turns out, very good at leaving things there. Why do you come yourself? I asked. You have 100 warriors. You could send any of them. You come every night. The fire behind me cracked and settled. He looked at the wolf, and then at the dark line of the threshold he would not cross, and then, only then, last of all, at me. Because if I send a man, he said, the man will see where my wolf chooses to sleep. And then the whole court will know what I already know. His jaw moved once before he found the rest. And I cannot afford for them to know it. Know what? He didn't answer. He whistled the wolf to heel. It went, this time slow and sulking. And he turned to go, and at the end of the corridor he stopped, without turning around. Stop being kind to him, he said. It's making this impossible. He left the door of my understanding standing open, exactly as wide as he'd found it, and I stood in it a long time after he'd gone. The list I found by accident. I want that on the record. Because of what came after, I was not snooping. Bram had sent me to the king's antechamber with a sleeping draught for his old wound, and the steward waved me to leave it on the desk. And the desk was where the ledger lay open, and I have eyes. It was a list of names. Pack daughters, noble girls, the candidates, the women a king weighs when a king must wed. Sigrid's name sat at the top in a clerk's neat hand. And down at the bottom, in that hard slanting hand I knew now better than my own, someone had written one more name that did not belong on any such list. Wren, and then struck a line clean through it. I stood there holding a sleeping draught and felt the floor tilt again, harder this time. So that was it. He had thought of me, for 1 weak moment, his wolf's madness leaking into his hand, and then come to his senses and crossed me out. The stillroom girl. Of course. I had let myself wonder. I had read his book by candlelight, and here was the answer in his own writing, a line drawn through me as neatly as a sum corrected. I put the draught down. I left. And somewhere between that desk and my own cold door, the thing that had been soft in me 3 weeks running went quiet and hard. I had spent my life being beneath notice and calling it peace. I was done calling it that. If I was to be crossed off lists by men who would not cross a threshold, then I would stop waiting in doorways to be chosen, and I would start deciding things for myself. The wolf could sleep where it liked. I would stop apologizing for it. And the next time Sigrid of Frostmere told me what happened to clever little nobodies, I would tell her exactly what I thought of women who needed a crown to feel tall. Let it come, I said, to the empty corridor, in a voice I had never used before. Let all of it come. It came 3 days later, in the great hall, in front of everyone. There was a feast, a formal one, the Frostmere envoy at the high table, the betrothal everybody expected hanging in the smoke over the long fires. I had no business there. I was carrying a fever tincture to one of the king's guard who'd been too proud to leave his post, and I came in through the low servant's door at the side, and I had meant to be invisible the way I was so good at being. The wolf had other plans. It came off the dice in a black streak the length of the hall, and 100 warriors reached for steel. And it did not so much as glance at them. It crossed the entire court, past the high table, past Sigrid in her silver, past the king half risen from his seat with horror on his face, and it stopped in front of me, the lowest ranked person in that whole blazing room. And it sat. And it bowed its great head, and it pressed its brow to the back of my hand. And it held there. In the language of wolves there is no louder thing. The Alpha's wolf, choosing, in front of the assembled pack and a rival kingdom's envoy, the kitchen-end nobody with a clay cup in her hands. The silence was enormous. Sigrid stood up. "Your Majesty," she said, and her voice rang the length of the hall, sweet and carrying and lethal. "It seems your beast has been keeping company beneath your notice, or perhaps not beneath it." She let that sit. Frostmere came in good faith to a king, not to a man whose own wolf shames him in his hall over a servant. Send the creature away, and the girl with it, or Frostmere will know exactly what kind of weakness sits on the northern throne. It was well done. I'll give her that even now. She had turned the wolf's choice into an accusation of weakness, and a weak king is a king other packs test, and every warrior in that hall knew it. I watched the trap close. I watched the king understand it closing. He had to disown me now, publicly, completely, or look like a man his own beast could overrule. He looked at me across the whole length of the hall, and I lifted my chin, because I had decided 3 days ago that I would not stand in any more doorways waiting to be chosen, and I would not stand in this one either. My wolf, Soren said, is not the one who shames this hall. He came down off the dais. I will not have her spoken of as a thing to be sent away. Then you admit it, Sigrid said, triumphant. I admit nothing to you. His voice had gone very quiet, which I would learn was the most dangerous thing it could do. Frostmere came for an alliance. Frostmere can have its answer in the morning, in council, like men, not by baiting a girl in my hall. It should have ended there. It nearly did. But the Frostmere envoy, a grey, bearded warrior named Halvard, who had not said a word all night, rose from the high table, and there was a blade in his hand, and his eyes were on the king, and I understood with sick suddenness that Sigrid had never come only to marry him. She had come with a second plan folded behind the first, for exactly the moment a king refused her, and the moment was now. A king his own beast won't obey, Halvard said, is no king at all. Frostmere claims the northern throne by right of challenge, and the blade was already coming down, and the king had no steel drawn, and I was closer than any of his 100 warriors. You know this part. You've known it since the first words I spoke to you. I stepped into the path of the blade with a fistful of valerian and the wrong shoes, and I put myself between the king of the Iron Territories and the sword meant for his throat, and the whole court inhaled at once, and Sigrid said my name like a curse. And Sorin said, "No, just that." But he moved on it, faster than I have ever seen anything move, faster than a man should, and his hand closed around Halvard's wrist and turned it, and the blade rang off the flagstones, and then the wolf was there too, all teeth and fury between me and every threat in the room. And it was over in the space of one breath. Halvard on his knees, the blade on the floor. The king standing over both, with me at his back and his wolf at my feet, breathing like a forge. He turned to me, in front of all of them, and the thing his face had been fighting for 3 weeks finally, completely lost. "You stepped in front of a blade," he said. "For me. Why would you?" He stopped. His hand came up like he might touch my face, and then didn't, hovering in the cold air between us. "You could have died." "So could you," I said. "You weren't even armed." "What kind of king comes to a betrothal feast without a blade?" "The kind," he said, "who did not expect to need one in his own hall. The kind who has been so busy keeping you off a list that he forgot to watch his own back." And there, in front of the entire court, the thing I had read so wrongly came out into the light. "I crossed your name off that list to keep you alive," he said. "Frostmir's demand was plain. I take Sigrid, or whoever I openly favour becomes a claim, a target, a way to bleed me." Every name I struck through after she came near, so that no one watching could say the king had chosen, so that you would be no one worth hurting. His jaw worked. "I have spent 3 weeks making myself look like a man who could not stand the sight of you. It was the only protection I had to give, and my own wolf undid it every single night, by sleeping at your door where the whole world could see. I stood there in the ringing hall, and felt every wrong thing I had believed turn over and show me its other face. The fury at the door, not at me. The crossed out name, not shame. The man who would not cross my threshold, not because he didn't want to, but because once he did there would be no protecting me from what wanting me cost. "You could have told me," I said. My voice did not come out steady. I let it not come out steady. "And put the knowing on you too." He shook his head. "No. I would rather you thought me cruel and lived." The wolf chose that moment to lean its whole enormous weight against his leg and look up at him with luminous, insufferable satisfaction, as if to say, "Told you, you stubborn man." And a sound came out of the king that I had never heard from him, and that half the court had surely never heard in their lives. He laughed. Once, helpless and astonished, and undone. "He has been right about you," Sorin said, "since the first morning. I am only now catching up." The kiss, when it came, was not a thing of mouths or heat or any of the words I am not permitted to use about it. It was him crossing the last distance he had refused to cross for 3 weeks. It was a threshold finally walked through. Something I had been holding shut for 22 careful years came open all at once, quiet and enormous, and I understood that I had been recognised, not rescued, not chosen like a name off a list, but seen, exactly as I was. By the one man who had everything to lose by seeing me. He pulled back just far enough to rest his brow against mine, and that was all, and it was everything. Sigrid was screaming about treason. The court was on its feet. Gunnar, the king's second, a broad, quiet man who had watched the whole thing with his arms folded, finally moved. And what he did was draw his own blade and lay it flat at my feet. And one by one, down the length of that hall, the warriors of the Iron Territories did the same. The fallout was not clean. I won't pretend it was. Packs do not bend their whole shape in a night without it costing. Frostmir's challenge failed, but Halvard had drawn steel in the King's Hall, and that is its own kind of war, whether you wanted one or not. There were 3 hard weeks of envoys and threats before the northern border settled, and it settled because Sorin rode out himself and made it settle, and I did not sleep well the nights he was gone. Sigrid was stripped of her retinue and sent back to Frostmere in disgrace, which made her dangerous in a quieter way, and Gunnar set watchers on the North Road that are watching still. The court that had built an unkind story about me had to take it apart and build a new one, and they did it slowly, and some of them did it badly, and Aluna, who came up from the stillroom, learned fast which smiles were real. But I had spent my whole life being beneath notice, and I found I was not afraid of a little scrutiny once I had decided to stand up straight under it. I had stepped in front of a blade. After that, the whispers of a few proud wolves were a small weather, and I let them pass over me, and most of them, in time, passed. 6 months later, the gardens at Caldmere came back. There was a walled garden on the east side of the fortress that no one had walked in years, overgrown, the paths lost, a place the old king's people had let go to seed. I had it cleared that spring, and I planted it with the things a stillroom needs and a few things it doesn't. The bright, useless flowers I had never in my life had any business growing, and it became the place I went in the mornings. It became, I noticed, the place Sorin went too. A man who had stopped walking through doors had started leaving every one of them open behind him, and the open door I cared about most was the one to that garden, where I would find him already sitting on the low stone step with a book of remedies in his hands and his impossible wolf sprawled across the threshold, asleep. Exactly where it had decided 3 seasons ago that it belonged. He no longer pretended he had come for the wolf. A letter came that morning, from the southern village where I'd been born, from a woman who had known me when I was nobody's anything. Word travels. She wanted to know if the stories were true, that the stillroom girl was Luna of the Iron Territories now, that she had a king and a court and a garden, that a great black wolf slept across her door every night, and her husband had given up entirely on telling it not to. I sat on the step beside him, with the letter in my lap, in the early sun, with the most feared man in the north reading remedies over my shoulder and correcting them in the margins, and his wolf snoring at our feet like a thing that had never doubted any of this for a single day. I had been crossed off a list once, to keep me safe. I thought, watching him mouth a word he didn't like in his own old book, and reach for a quill to fix it. Watching a king who had nearly died rather than be caught wanting me sit in the sun, and want me out loud where the whole world could see, I thought, let them see. Let all of it come, and I picked up the quill before he could, and I crossed his correction out, and wrote in the better one, and he looked at me like I had hung the moon and the iron both. So tell me, that night in the hall, when his wolf crossed 100 warriors to bow at the hand of the lowest person in the room, do you think the beast simply knew before he did? Or do you think some part of Sorin had already chosen me, and only sent his wolf ahead because it was the one part of him a king is allowed to lose control of? I've turned it over for 6 months, and I still can't decide. Tell me your theory below. I read them all. And if you want her story to keep going, if you want to know what Sigrid sent back from Frostmere come winter, and what the wolf did about it, comment the wolf, and stay close. Follow Moon and Iron. Share this with someone who'd understand a love built out of open doors and stubborn beasts, and I'll tell you what happened the next time the most powerful man in the north tried, and failed, to keep me safe, by pretending not to love me. Her side of the story. Stay a while. The door's open.